What's up everybody, welcome back to Semi Stories. Today OP got nuclear revenge on his ex, who slept with her own cousin. Let's start this story by saying this happened 12 years ago. I'm now happily married with 3 children and regret absolutely nothing. I was with my now ex for 3 years. I had noticed that she was being extremely controlling. I was expected to give every little detail of my day and tell her my schedule in advance. And if I deviated from that, she would be very upset. She chalked it up to just having bad feelings, and shrugged it off as her paranoia for past relationships of infidelity. Now, I have never once cheated or strayed, and I never gave her a reason to act like this. It felt unbecoming of my fiancé to act in such a way. Now, this is where it gets juicy. After she had asked for my schedule to make plans, as mine tends to be more hectic than hers, I noticed she was texting someone. Now, in my line of work, if I put in more than 40 hours, I have the ability to take time off at will, as long as work is completed at a later date. I was very good friends with her brother, and I still am. We laugh about it to this day, and he actively reminds her of it. I messaged him stating that I wanted to do something special for her a little bit earlier than our anniversary to make sure it was a special surprise. They both worked in the same fabrication facility. He was a fabricator, and she was a shipping manager. He was kind enough to let me know her schedule, and that's where the discrepancy falls into place. Without my knowledge, she was forgoing overtime. She worked 12-hour shifts Monday through Friday, with the exception of Wednesday, when she would only work a half day. She had been taking Wednesdays off right around the time that she started getting extremely controlling. Lucky for me, I had stacked several days of leisure time up, so taking a Wednesday off for me was not an issue. A few days go by and Wednesday's here. I put on my work gear and left for work. I was expecting her to leave as our apartment complex had 2 exits on the same road I could see directly across from a shopping center, so I parked my car near the back and waited. After about an hour, I noticed a very specific red Mustang with a specific decal on the back window. It was her cousin by marriage. I had also done my due diligence to take an old laptop, which we kept on our desk in an office area with a full view of the living room, bedroom and bathroom, plus the kitchen. I had it set up for remote access and had it alert me when the webcam noticed movement. Giving her the benefit of the doubt, I thought he may be dropping something off or coming over to assist her with something, as her family does sometimes. Sure enough, a message came through, so I remoted into my laptop. He walks through the door without skipping a beat. She unbuttons his shirt and begins kissing him, while I created the URL link for the livestream. And, as she was preoccupied, we had a family group text and a friend group text. They were both part of it, but at the current time, they were currently indisposed and didn't look at their phones. They didn't even wait. They could have gone to the bathroom, but no, they decided to get freaky deaky right there on the couch. I sent the link off to the friend group chat and the family group chat. Within minutes, I'm getting calls non-stop from friends and family alike. There was no turning back. She was getting blown up. But she was ignoring her phone. Not until the 4th or 5th call came through did they decide to take a break. Just for context, the state I live in allows recording of personal property regardless of occupancy. I was the only one on the lease. She wasn't allowed to be on the lease because of her poor credit. The call she had picked up was from her cousin's mother, who she was currently banging. She answered the phone on speaker, and I kid you not, the first words out of this mother's mouth were, "Stop having sex with my son!" They both became rigid, and she began to stutter over her words, saying, "What are you talking about?" The mother then divulged that there was a live feed of them sent out by me to her family. She grabbed every pillow off the couch and covered herself up. The cousin staggered off, trying to put on his pants and shoes, just to trip himself and bang his head off my coffee table. By this time I had made my way to the front of the apartment complex. I was there to greet the adulterer as he came out from the front exit. He froze and began to cry, apologizing profusely. Now, I'm not going to lie, what happened afterwards was not my best moment, and I nearly got into legal trouble if it weren't for the fact that he was trespassing on private property. Let's just say I had a cast for 6 weeks, and he wasn't in any family photos for months. I went up to the apartment where she was now fully clothed and crying inconsolably. I asked her if it was snot or semen on her face. Then I told her not to answer because it didn't matter anyway. I gave her 1 hour to remove all her belongings, as again everything in the apartment was mine, except for clothes, some makeup and a few kitchen utensils. Her mother would not let her son move back in, as she was just filled with embarrassment. Same for her brothers, and the cousin's mother kicked her own son out. Rumors spread around town very quickly, and for a lack of better words, she was untouchable. I could not imagine if something like this happened to me, and with her own cousin, for God's sakes. Opie mentioned in the comments that she moved to a different state and married a firefighter, but I think her reputation is ruined for the rest of her life, especially with her own family. But that's a great thing, because cheaters deserve nothing. In his next story, Opie gets nuclear revenge on a Karen who tries to get him fired. Some years ago, I started working for a heavy industrial manufacturing company. I lucked out and got a great supervisor for a boss, Joe. The work was hard, working 12 hours a day for 13 days in a row, and then a Sunday off, and then back again for 13 days. I was young and didn't mind. It helped my wife and I save up for a house. After about 6 months, Joe noticed I was picking up the work pretty fast and he promoted me to group leader position. This came with a raise and increased responsibility that most other workers didn't want. Joe would put me in troubled groups in his department and I would work on general improvements, figuring out issues. This was a union shop and the mentality was to just put your hours in. Don't work harder or smarter, just do your time and don't kill the job, was the unspoken motto. After a few years, Joe was promoted as manager and he transferred me with him to his departments. While I wasn't a supervisor yet, I was supervisor in all but name. The supervisors loved it because they never had to leave the office and I liked it because it was good learning experience. I made a good reputation and got a lot of respect from workers and from management. Eventually, Joe's area was doing so well that he was promoted to plant manager. As before, he wanted to promote me with him, this time to a supervisor spot. We talked in length because the only supervisor spot open was working for Karen. Karen was female, a minority, and a member of the LGBTQ community. She was the poster child on the company website of the inclusiveness in the workplace. Literally her face was the one they used. She was also a freshly minted manager and Joe was not confident in her abilities, but me being the plucky go-getter with a can-do attitude decided to take the position. I had the interview with Karen and got to meet some of her supervisors. They were very quiet and reserved. Once I was promoted, I worked in tandem with another supervisor, Chris. Chris was young, had one small child and his wife was pregnant, and a stay-at-home mom. During the first week, everything was going well. I was learning all the employees, getting to know the process, and getting my feeling for the area. During the second week, Chris's wife went into labor, and she was having a hard time. Chris went on paternity leave for 6 weeks, and I was tossed into the deep end in charge of the whole area solo, with 60 employees. I was barely treading water, but I was doing my best. When I would ask Karen for guidance or assistance, she would scoff like it was beneath her and tell me, "If I have to do your job, then I don't need you." So I gritted my teeth and worked my tail off. My wife got me a smartwatch and I was averaging 25,000 steps a day trying to keep everything running. We were holding our own and employees all did what they could to help as the situation was not ideal for anyone. A few weeks in, I was reviewing some quality documents and I noticed that one of the quality gates was not being followed. I emailed the information to the quality engineers and they lost their minds. This was a 4-hour operation on a 20-hour part that we were skipping entirely. Turns out that one of the reasons Karen got promoted was because she was running her department so efficiently. Then it came to light that she made the decision to skip this quality process, saving 20% of time. Except the engineers never signed off on this and it caused massive damage control. The process had to be reinstated, and the parts that were never checked had to have warranty extensions. This caused the company to have egg on their face and Karen to look bad. During this time, Karen also became more vindictive. She would openly tell people she would never be fired and could do whatever she wanted. She would walk the departments and if she didn't like someone, she would make supervisors write them up by the end of the day. She wanted us to find a reason and if we didn't, she would take it out on the supervisors. For example, forcing the supervisors to stay late to do inventory or something else menial just because she could. She would not let the supervisors make any decisions until she approved, so something like overtime had to wait for her approval and she would not respond until the end of the day, causing the depths to scramble. Then, if there weren't enough overtime employees to do the work, she would blame it on the supervisors. While the supervisors knew this wasn't right, we all needed our job and tried to do the best we could for Karen and the employees. We were mainly rodeo clowns to Karen being the bull. The first day Chris was back, him and I were pulled into Karen's office. She started berating me of how poor a job I was doing. making her look bad and how I never came to her for help. This made me speechless because of the previous comments she made and the fact that supervisor work was beneath her. After the meeting, I was still a bit stunned, but I put it together that she was about to railroad me out of the company, and this was the first step. I called Joe and asked for a meeting that same day. When I got together with Joe, I started telling him about the things that were going on that he had no idea. The harassment, the abuse, the vindictive nature. Ironically, while I was speaking with him, another supervisor called him to complain about Karen as well, with the same grievances. Joe was stunned and said he would speak with Karen, but gave me carte blanche on any open spot in the company starting next day. He really didn't want to lose me. I did a lateral transfer to a different department doing engineering IT work, and I thought that was the end of it. A few weeks later, I was leaving work and Karen mentioned that I never turned in my laptop and phone to her. I told her I didn't know I had to, but that I could give it to her tomorrow. She smirked and said that she would get it back soon enough. I didn't think too much of it at the time. After about 6 months, I had my review with my new boss, Jake. The review went great and he was very happy with my work, and was a bit surprised at how fast I picked up things. At the end of the meeting, Jake mentioned offhand how Karen tried to intervene in the review and get me fired, but Joe stepped in and squashed it. Alright Karen, now you've pissed me off. After I left Karen's department, the turnover rate went through the roof. The supervisors were quitting at a rate of 1 every 3 months. Keep in mind that this is a legacy company that had multi-generations working. Fathers, mothers, sons, entire families. Some areas had 3 generations working side by side, and yet Karen was rolling over employees and supervisors like a steamroller. Working for her became the kiss of death. I casually mentioned to Joe about the turnover and he told me that he couldn't figure out what was going on. People were quitting without notice and no one was doing an exit interview. I told Joe that Karen was writing people up to force them out. When they would hand her the resignation letters or 2-week notice, she would tell them to leave immediately and throw away the letter. Then she would tell HR that the person quit on the spot, and that was the end of it. Joe told me that because of who she was and how high she was, the company wouldn't do anything to her until they had an airtight case. So, we went to work. I took the supervisors working for Karen out drinking after work a few times a week and made sure I had my hand on the pulse. If someone was quitting, I made sure they emailed their letter of resignation to Karen and CC'd Joe and HR, stayed for the exit interview, and that they called the company integrity hotline for good measure. Things were progressing really well, and I had all the supervisors on board except Chris. Chris really needed the job and Karen was not writing him up. Through a stroke of luck, I found out that Karen was lowballing his raises as a cost-saving measure. That's why she was not harassing him. When I told Chris, he was furious and wanted to quit on the spot. I encouraged him to speak with Joe before he leaves. Joe and Chris had a very productive meeting and Chris decided to stay. Now, all the supervisors were on board. Joe brought in a HR bigwig from the headquarters in Kansas, and over the course of a week, each supervisor was sent in for an interview, discreetly without Karen knowing. By the time the interviews were over, they had emails, texts, eyewitnesses, and a mountain of evidence. This next part I heard from the people, HR, Joe, etc. Despite everything, the company wanted to keep this quiet, so they brought in Karen and said they no longer needed her and offered a very generous severance package. Karen, being Karen, lost it on the HR people. She threatened to sue for discrimination and even called a lawyer. That's when the company pulled out a stack of evidence and rescinded the severance offer. After a few months, Karen found a new job as a plant manager in a different factory. And I found out where. I casually mentioned to the union reps at my factory where Karen was working and suggested that maybe they should give the union rep at the other factory a call. She was fired within 3 months for employee harassment. Last I heard, she had to sell her house and move out of state to find a job. Now, I've personally had to deal with a Karen before as well. It was a male Karen, but a Karen nonetheless. He would always micromanage and try to keep everyone in line and always talked about himself being the greatest at his job. For legal reasons, I can't really include what happened next, but his life is pretty much ruined. So what about you guys? Have you ever had to deal with a Karen like this at your job? Please let me know down in the comments and I will see you next time. See ya!